How about, I apologize to the jury, this is pretty graphic. How about pull up 109? Okay, so this depicts a very big wound in the shoulder, correct?
Yeah, that's a typical appearing shotgun entrance wound.
Okay, and would you come down here for just a second, please? We done? Hold on, wait 1 second. You're right. I need to offer these.
Your Honor, the statement requests that the defense be exhibited in evidence before the judge and the jury.
I apologize, Your Honor. And this is exhibit number. Got multiples of these. What's this exhibit number? I'm sorry. 109. 109. Okay. Yeah. Here it is. I apologize, Your Honor. I got ahead of myself. Won't take 2 seconds. 110, 109. Here we go. This is state defense exhibit number 109. Have you seen that before?
Yes, this is my autopsy photo.
Offered in evidence, Your Honor.
Submitted.
Would you put it up the screen, please? Now, as we look at this photo, we see this is the entrance wound.
Yes,
And then it goes in here, correct?
that's correct.
So, but this is a much larger wound than the next one in line, is it not?
Well, that's okay.
Well, let me ask you this. In terms of understanding a shotgun pattern, as we saw in the photo, starts out basically the size of the shell, right? If you just answer the question, and then you can explain. Does it start out as the same size as the shell?
Yes.
Okay. And as it goes forward, the pattern expands, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And it continues to expand even after it hits something, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So now please explain to me why this wound, and it looks like it's, I mean, if you use me on my left shoulder, what is the
Yes. I'd be delighted to tell you why this entrance wound is larger than this one, even though what you said is correct about the spread. And that's because the entrance wound to the left shoulder, it's not straight on, perpendicular. If it was straight on perpendicular, then we would have a smaller hole. But this is going in a tangential manner across. So we're not really looking at a perpendicular, entrance wound that's going to make a round hole. So as it's coursing along the top of the left shoulder, we get more of an oblong hole. In contrast, its continuation into the left side of the cheek is kind of straight on at a 90-degree angle. So that's why that is smaller. So there was nothing about this that was inconsistent with what I would expect from a shotgun wound.
So tell me, so you're saying this second hole was made in this direction. Is that what you're saying?
I just said that was a continuation of the logical sequences. It went through here, it's causing a lot of destruction, and then entered the left side of the neck.
So that big wound is because it's in a different direction than the small wound, is your explanation?
At a different angle.
Right.
along the surface of the skin.
Okay, and there's no pellets in his face, are there?
There were some pellets that we saw in the X-ray.
But not in his face?
Not in the front of his face.
Right. So as it continues on, is there any evidence that it expands even more?
Well, it did cause, there's so much destruction, we can't exactly, have a single, easily tracked path. Because when the skull is involved, there's so much expansion, usually either from gases or just from the blast of the projectiles, that we can't really track. It caused an exit on the right side of the back of the head with loss of the brain, and lots of skull fractures, predominantly on the right side.
Okay. But you would agree with me that wound appears to be much larger than the next wound?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Okay. And you have an explanation for that. Could the other explanation be that this is an exit wound and that is an exit wound? Could that be a reasonable explanation? I'm going to show you something in a minute that may assist you in making that decision. But is it a possibility?
That is not, I do not believe this is consistent with an exit wound from a shotgun. There would be a lot more destruction because, it would be coming, it had to be coming from somewhere, right? Somewhere else.
How about a contact wound on the head, on the right back of the head? What would you expect to see on the bone structure of the back right of the head if that was a contact wound on the head?
Well, I would not expect the brain to come out. We would have had opening of a lot of skull. We would have had a path through the brain, which is not at all what happens here.
So if there was a contact wound, and we saw a moment ago, and you agree, that the gas would enter first, explode the skull, the brain would pop out. Did you find any pellets in the brain?
I don't remember if they were from the brain, but the brain was basically intact. A contact gunshot wound to the top of the head would cause, a huge defects of the brain.
Right, because the gas going in on a contact wound would create such a pressure, as we just read, that the skull would explode and the brain would pop out.
No, I don't think that would happen from a wound that was going toward the brain from above. I think we would have certainly destruction of the brain, but it wouldn't just pop out because it's in the path of fire. There's going to be massive destruction of the brain. It may end up on the floor, but it's going to be in multiple fragments. So in my experience doing this for a long time, I do not think that the brain would have popped out the way it did from an entrance wound on the top of the head.
Okay. Now, let me ask you to look at and this is under seal, and I would also, Your Honor, ask the other photos I put in be put under seal.
They're under seal.
Thank you. Would you put defense exhibit number 59, and I apologize to the jury for the graphic nature of this. Go ahead. Okay, I would like you, do you recognize this?
I've not seen this photograph.
Would you disagree with me that's a photograph of, it's been testified, Paul Murdaugh
at
the scene?
Yes.
And the way he was found?
I don't know how he was found.
Okay, but this is a photograph you've never seen?
I've never seen this photograph.
Okay, let me get one thing before I ask you questions about it. Okay, a couple things. If you would center on his head, okay, and make it a little bit, can you make it a little bit bigger, please? So do you see a sort of semicircle defect in the skull right here? You see where I'm looking?
Do it again.
Right here?
I do see a defect, yes.
Right, in the skull.
Yes.
Semicircle.
It does have a semicircular.
Okay. Can you determine from looking at the photograph any beveling?
As I said earlier, beveling is not really too reliable when we have so much destruction of the head. But if you're asking me if that could have been a contact shotgun wound to the top of the head with a kind of curved entrance, I would expect to see soot. We always get soot from contact wounds, and it's deposited on the outer table of the skull. So there is no burning, no soot on the outer table of the skull to support that.
Did you take an autopsy photo of this area of the skull?
Well, when he came in, I do believe I took an area of the skull, but it may not have caught that perfectly.
Okay. Did you shave his head?
No, I did not.
You did shave Maggie's head for a head wound, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And why didn't you shave his head? To examine this, you would agree with me, had his head been shaved, you would have had a better look at this wound.
Well, I believe that my assessment of it was correct, and without usually shaving is along an entrance wound, not an exit wound. So I determined this was an exit, and shaving is not done on exit wounds. I shaved Maggie's because that was an entrance wound, and it gives me an opportunity to see the margins of the entrance defect.
I guess what I'm asking is, you decided that was an exit wound without shaving the head, without looking for stippling, without looking for soot, because you would agree with me that to do that, effectively you'd have to shave the head.
To observe marks on the skin, yes. But
Okay.
also there would be soot on the outer table of the skull.
Well, did you look for it? You apparently had already decided.
Yeah, well, I did look. I didn't take a picture from this angle necessarily. I did take a picture after from the top of his head. But my determination, based on my experience, was that the entrance wound was over here. Doesn't mean somebody else cannot disagree with me. But that's my opinion.
Somebody could disagree with you, and that would be a reasonable disagreement.
Well, I would say that people can disagree, but that doesn't mean that doesn't change the truth.
You would also agree with me, though, that your notes contain no mention of the lack of or presence of stippling or soot on that part of his head. You never looked for it, did you?
Well, I look for it. I look at all of the wounds, and if there was, I would have documented it. But I don't document the absence of soot or stippling on what I determined to be an exit wound.
And I don't see any note of yours where you examined that exit wound in detail. I mean, shaved his head, looked for some distortion that would be inconsistent with the conclusion you'd already come to, correct?
Well, I came to the conclusion based on my examination of the entire area.
Okay, and as this book indicates, the vast majority of this kind of damage, the vast majority, I mean, they say most probably, almost certainly, is a contact wound to the head that injects the gas, which explodes the head. Is that not true?
No, I do think that you're kind of you're extending his statement. He's describing contact gunshot wounds to the head. Actually, a contact gunshot wound to the top of the head like that, like I told you, it would have caused fragmentation of the brain, not ejection of the brain, based on my experience. And then there would be a lot more, we would have a lot more fragments. It would never have just left the rest of the skull intact. We would have had fractures of the face. There's massive amount. I don't believe that the fractures of his skull are consistent with that being a contact shotgun wound. I understand that that is a massive destruction of the head from shotgun wounds. But in this case, we do have the brain basically left intact. We don't have a path through the brain. It's a very dynamic, there's gases, there's pellets, there's fractured bone. But in my opinion, based on my experience, that was not an entrance wound, and that this was not an exit.
And you indicated, I looked at your autopsy report, that well, first of all, do you believe this was caused by pellets entering the brain cavity?
No, I think it's a combination of different things. I don't think it's from pellets specifically.
What was it?
I think it's from the gas buildup in the brain and fractures of the skull, and that just basically a lot of gas buildup.
So where did those gases come from?
Yeah, it's a huge amount of energy from a shotgun.
I'm sorry, if you'd answer my question. Where did the gases you just testified that caused this destruction come from?
From the shotgun wound.
A shotgun wound you testified was created by a weapon that was more than 4 feet away. The gases traveled through the air, traveled through that shoulder wound, traveled through the neck, and then exploded his head.
It's not just gases, but it's a combination of gases and the pellets as well.
But there would have been a significant amount of gas involved to explode his head.
Yes.
And there would be pellets. Would they be present in the brain after that brain exploded?
The brain, the pellets may not have reached the brain. The brain may have been ejected just by virtue of the skull fragmenting and the base of the skull pushing it up. It's not possible for me to say exactly why the brain came out here.
But you would agree with me, based on the literature, it's much more common for a contact wound where the gas goes in contact to explode the head.
Well, in my experience, a contact shotgun wound could cause this type of damage, but it would frequently cause even more damage. Like a lot of times there's just massive destruction of the entire head. At least the front of his face where bones were intact.
I hear what you're saying is that it would have produced massive destruction, but it would have always included massive destruction of the face.
Okay. Well, let me tell you, there are other reasons why I concluded that the entrance wounds were here. Okay. We have basically a bunch of tight pellets over here.
Right.
If they would be more spread out if the entrance wound was here. By the time it got to here, there'd be a lot more pellets over a wider area.
How many more?
Well, it would. No, I'm not saying more pellets. I'm saying there would be a wider spread of pellets. This was still in a relatively narrow range. It was along the top of the shoulder. So
from my head to my shoulder on a direct line.
Yes.
How far is that?
Well, honestly, the spread would not. I don't believe they would have been as tight along the shoulder. I think we also would have had a larger defect. Probably on the
larger defect.
Yeah, look.
Between here and here.
Every single shotgun wound and gunshot wound, they're each a little bit different. So a lot of this is judgment and assessment at the time of the autopsy, and it's not theoretical whether there's gas buildup or not gas buildup. I can see this as a shotgun wound. We have pellet entrance defects around this large defect.
Pellet? You just told me you couldn't do a bevel assessment on skin. How do you know they're entrance rather than exit on the skin?
Well, I'll tell you. And the reason is if pellets are going through the shoulder, we wouldn't have a big, large, oblong defect. We would have holes from the pellets, not an oblong, ovoid defect. So you'll recall on his arm, Paul's arm, those pellets, they came from, and then along here, we just basically have pellet exit wounds, and we don't have that on the shoulder. We have a basically a larger confluent wound that was not caused by individual pellets.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then. If you can take that picture down, please.
Yeah. It's not my opinion that the entrance wound is to the top of
And
the head.
could you put up, no, we don't even need to do that. I don't need to see the picture. The chest shot goes through his chest, comes out under his arm, right?
Yeah, on the left side, yes.
The left side comes out under his arm. And what do we have? What do we have on the inside and outside of that arm?
We have pellet.
Coming in and out. We have a pattern of pellets.
Yes.
Just like the pattern of pellets that you're talking about on what you say the exit wound here. Exit wound from about the same distance, pellets. From the same distance, pellets. Correct?
Well, there are pellets in the shoulder, but we have a ovoid defect at the top of the left shoulder. They're not a bunch of individual pellet wounds. We have pellets embedded in the tissue, but the actual defect, we don't have a defect like that on his arm, even though it may be the same distance. And the reason is because the pellets are exiting, but each one is going through the left arm individually. Okay. Whereas if this was the entrance at the right side of the top of the back of the head, it's a good thought. Let's think about this. And if it was coming through the head, regardless of what happened to the brain, and then exited here and then went along here, we would have a lot more individual pellet wounds on the shoulder as opposed to a large, huge, big area of skin and subcutaneous tissue loss. Pellets don't cause that type of damage on their own.
So you and I both counted something between 30 and 40 pellets in that shoulder wound a little while ago, right?
Yeah, there were something like about that.
Do you know how many pellets are in a duck shot or bird shot 12-gauge shell?
No, I don't remember.
So you don't know whether that was 90% of the pellets or 60% of the pellets or 50?
No, I do not.
Does that make a difference to you? How many of the pellets that were fired ended up there?
No.
But you're saying just because the wound here is bigger and the wound in his chin is smaller doesn't mean the shotgun pellets spread out, right? They spread out and they don't contract. You would agree with me? Just
I don't really know whether to agree with you because I'm not understanding your question.
Okay, let me rephrase it. If you view that wound on his shoulder as the entrance wound, and I believe you have,
yes,
you would agree with me that it is, whether it's coming across the top or whatever, it is a bigger wound than the wound in his chin. In other words, are you saying that those were so focused that they, as they went through or across the top, they actually contracted?
No.
Okay.
I explained that this was larger because it was tangential across the top of the shoulder. So that's the kind of wound.
You agree with me that reasonable people could have a difference of opinion about these facts?
Yes.
Okay. Pardon me.